Hello again, my name is Paul Gilbert, and we're developing a series of talks to look at how the scientific understanding of compassion can help us deal with life difficulties, particularly at the moment. Now today, talk 11, we're going to be looking at self-criticism, because self-criticism can really undermine our efforts to cope with difficulty. Now, self-criticism was actually a research area of mine, so I've split these talks up into two. So this one, talk 11, is really going to be looking at the nature of compassion, of criticism, because I think when we understand how criticism works, it gives us much more insight into why it's often quite harmful to us, and how compassion and what we call compassionate self-correction or compassion guidance is a much better way of coping with adversity and difficulty. So I'm going to share my screen with you again, as we do. So here we go, onto here, and onto here. Great. So here we are, understanding self-criticism. Let's have a look at this. So once again, to remind you that we are layering the mind up in terms of algorithms, and today we're going to be looking at this one. So if threatened by a more powerful other, then submit. And this is going to be really important because, so strangely enough, it underpins self-criticism. So we're going to look at what we call the strange evolutionary story of self-criticism. Now, our minds are full of algorithms, as we said. Most animals live in groups. And in order for them to live in groups, they often have to compete for resources, compete over food or sex, you know, the usual kind of things animals will compete over. In order to stop constant fighting, brains have evolved ways for animals to work out their social position and then live accordingly. Now, this is very important because otherwise there would be constant fighting over every resource. And this is linked to what we call the competitive motivational system. The competitive motivation system is that system that guides us, that helps us pay attention and think about how we should behave in competitive situations. This is going to be really quite important when we have a think about self-criticism. So the evolutionary strategy is that if animals are attacked by more powerful or more dominant, they have to have a way of turning off that attack. They have to be able to signal to the dominant, look, don't hit me, don't bite me, don't kill me, because I'm no threat really, I'm just a subordinate. And there's a whole range of displays animals use to be able to demonstrate they're in a subordinate position. Here is an example of wolves. Wolves will lay on their back and bare their throat. And this again signals to the dominant that actually they're not a threat, and the dominant doesn't have to bother injuring them. So it ends a conflict, it ends a fight by submission. Submissive behavior is one of the most important behaviors that regulate conflict in groups in nearly all animals that live in groups. And here's an example in chimpanzees, where we can see the little chimpanzee is really backing off and is quite anxious and frightened and showing a submissive response. So this is very, very important. So what does subordinates have to do in order to try to avoid getting into trouble with more dominants that will attack them or hurt them if they start making claims on things that they shouldn't, on resources or food or sex or whatever? Well, they have to socially compare. This is very important. They have to compare themselves with the dominant, the more powerful, and be aware of their limitations and their weaknesses. They have to work out, are you stronger than me or am I weaker than you? So they have to monitor their own behavior for possible punishment. And that means they pay attention, they're inwardly attending to themselves about what they can do and so forth. They mustn't get subordinates mustn't get overconfident, because if they do, again, the dominants will see them as a threat, as a competitive threat, and will attack them. Also, subordinates often try and appease a dominant to turn off aggression in the dominant, and sometimes will try to please that dominant. And humans do this a lot, actually, as we'll see in a moment. And certainly one of the things you have to do is to inhibit uprank aggression. So you don't pick an argument with the dominant, because then you can get into trouble. Now, what's interesting is that humans compete in a different way, really. And one of the things that the new brain has done, and our social intelligence and our empathy and our need for interconnectedness has done, is that we actually compete in quite a different way. We still compete aggressively, of course we do, but now we compete via social attractive. We want to be chosen, we want to be included. So we have what we call hierarchies of attractiveness, okay? And the more attractive individuals tend to get more of the share of resources. There's quite a lot of evidence now then that the more attractive you are in terms of physical looks or in terms of your abilities or intelligence or whatever it is, talents make you attractive to others, and then others will choose you as partners, as friends, as employees, or whatever it is. So it's not so much physical attacks now that is the issue that we worry about, but it's what we call desirability attacks. So when we get attacked by others, we get attacked for our desirability. We're seen as unworthy, unattractive, undesirable, unintelligent. Those are the attacks now that are going to stimulate the threat system and that tendency to start to want to subordinate and show subordinate defenses. So shaming attacks are much more common in terms of stimulating these physiological processes of wanting to go down like that. Okay, so when people shame you, if they shame you, particularly if they're dominant or the people that are very important to you, you can fight back, that would be one thing, but often we show this submissive response where the head goes down, we curl the body, we kind of can't quite think so clearly. And this is to stop us being the challenge to the shamer. When we're ashamed or we get a shame attack on us, then we have a loss of wantedness. We don't feel wanted. We feel a loss of support, help, connectedness. And it's this sense that when we're attacked, it's not so much physical injury, it's social injury. It's this feeling now we're being pushed away, we're being marginalized, we're not wanted, we're pushed onto the edges, as it were. It's this social attack which becomes the issue for humans, very, very important. And that is associated with this fear of rejection, isolation, and loneliness, the feeling of not being wanted, not being good enough, not attractive enough, not desirable enough. Very, very important. But interestingly and importantly, research shows that we're using the same defenses, the same algorithms as if it was a physical attack, okay? So we still show the head down, we still go silence, we still try and appease the attacker, even if it's a shame attacker. So if you think about your boss undermining you in a meeting by saying you're stupid or you haven't done the work properly, although it's not a physical attack, it can still make you feel very anxious and you're wanting to kind of appease your boss or whatever it is. So basically humans have these different tactics of attractiveness. And in the first instance, of course, we can, like other animals, simply be aggressive. We try to gain status and our place in the world by being aggressive. And the reason for doing that is we want to be coercive. We want to be threatening and authoritarian. And the outcome that we want is to be obeyed, to be reckoned with. We want people to submit us, to do what we tell them to do. You will obey me. You'll give me what I want when I want. And the idea is to inhibit them and stimulate their threat systems. That's the point of the strategy. And of course, most dominants in most species, that's the way they work. Humans, on the other hand, have this other mechanisms for deciding how resources are parceled up, who gets whose attention. And this is to show our attractiveness. So we want to show our talent, don't we? We want to show our competence. We want to show how friendly we are, okay? That's what we try to do. You know, we have talent competitions and so on and so on. And the idea really is that all of us want to be valued, we want to be chosen, we want to be freely given to. So, you know, I'd like my patients to come and see me because they think I'm good, not because they think I would threaten them or sue them if they don't come. And we all play this game, don't we? I mean, if you go to dinner with a friend, you know, at the end of the dinner, you say, oh, thank you, it was a wonderful meal. Thank you so much, a lovely evening. And then you walk outside and you go, oh my God, it's disgusting. Can't cook for anything. See? If you have a new lover, you say, oh, your love making is fantastic. You don't say, well, I've had better, I've had worse, it's okay. Okay, so the desire to be seen as attractive is extremely important for humans because attractiveness means connectedness, connectedness means safeness, safeness means survival, basically. Very, very important. And so we have this basic desire for attractiveness. So we can see how important this is because it gets linked in to how we deal with authority and particularly authorities that we can be frightened of. So this is, we call this an example of Freud revisited because it's a kind of an idea of being having anger turned against you in a way, turning your anger against you. Now, there were many societies that had ideas about gods that could control the weather, the famines, the diseases, fertility, and so forth. And if you had these powerful gods that can hurt you or help you, the one thing you have to do is to get on their side, get them on your side, right? So how do you do that? Well, you use the good old tactics of appeasing and pleasing. So firstly, you have to show that you will submit to their authority. That's the first thing. You're not going to disobey them. You have to prove that you are a subordinate, you're not a challenge. And then you have to give them stuff. So take the Aztecs, for example. They believed that their gods would be very pleased with them if they sacrificed virgins, children, and prisoners of war. And there's quite a lot in the archaeological evidence that, in fact, hundreds, if not thousands of children and virgins and so forth were sacrificed during the historical period of the Aztecs. The problem with all of this, though, is that what happens if you submit and you do your submissive stuff, and then there is no rains, the rains don't come, harmful things, diseases spread through your community. It looks like the gods are not supporting you, they're not helping you, they may even be sending plagues of lotus. What are you going to do? I mean, how do you end up thinking? And this is the issue, right? Recognizing, how do we think? How do we look at this problem when we're trying to get the powerful other to help us, but they're not, they're hurting us. And this is what happens. We start to self-monitor. What did we do? What have we done to upset you? Weren't there enough virgins? Maybe they lied, you know. So we start monitoring and wondering, what have we done? So the attention becomes this way. That's the first thing. You start paying attention to yourself and thinking, what have I done? What have I done? And you end up self-blaming yourself, okay? So this is very common in the context of being frightened of an authority. Now, this is important because you're going to see how this links into self-criticism in a moment. There is no historical record of any of the priests in the Aztecs going onto the altar when the rains didn't come, shaking their fists and say, "Oi, oi, you cheaters, where's the bloody rains? We sent you our best virgins. Send the rains or send the virgins back." No, that would be much too frightening, much too frightening. Of course it would, because you cannot send anger up rank, because if you do that, then the dominant will simply hurt you. They can just step on you. So this is very, very important. And when we're confronted by these dominant processes, the particular authorities that we're frightened of, we tend to monitor ourselves. What have I done? We self-blame, and then we try to appease, but we also have to inhibit our anger. And that can be quite important when we look at self-criticism. The other thing that's really interesting is that we also blame others, you know, because if it wasn't me that upset the gods, then maybe it was you. And this still goes on today. I mean, when we had the tsunami in the Indian Ocean in 2005, there were various religious people going around saying, this is God's punishment for decadence. You know, this is, so having this idea about how we respond to authority, we can be frightened of authority, then we take the blame for bad things, we assume it's our fault, and that is something that can be really quite tricky when it comes to dealing with self-criticism. Now, the point I want to say about all this is because when we're in the competitive mentality, when we're in this rank mentality of power and structure and competing for attractiveness, all of that stuff, we're monitoring our status, we're monitoring our social position, and then we're judging that in terms of, is it any good? And we can end up feeling that we're inadequate, we're not doing very well, we're incompetent. Now, we call that, in compassion focused therapy, we call that a middle level, or a middle level fear, but it's not the main one, because the main one is this one. The main one is the evolutionary one, because it actually doesn't matter if you're inadequate or you fail, if you think other people love you and support you, come what may. We have a lot of research on this now. If you're not worried about what other people will think about you, failure doesn't bother you so much. What bothers you is the consequences of failing, the fear that you're unattractive, unwanted. People are going to start marginalizing you in one way or another. If people find out about you, they're not going to be so keen on you. That's the kind of fear that really causes a lot of problems, and that's the fear of social injury. And sometimes, you know, individuals are very sensitized to this fear because they have been bullied as children, or they've grown up in very tricky households or whatever. But commonly, you often find for the very heavy people who are very harshly self-critical, there's often a history of being criticized or even worse. So the compassionate task then really is to always get behind the self-criticism and into the evolved threat and the unprocessed anger. And I'm going to show you a little bit, I hope, of how that works. The other thing to be aware of is that culture and social contexts play huge roles in stimulating or dampening individual competitiveness. Okay, so our general orientation of our competitive psychology, the way we think about status, we compare ourselves to others, that is also very much linked to social context. And Western societies are well known to be grossly overstimulating our competitive motivational processes. Plenty of evidence now that perfectionism and many other processes are increasing. So clear evidence that over the last 30 years, we have become more perfectionistic, more competitive, more individualistic, more narcissistic, more depressed, and more self-critical. Okay, and that's all to do with culture. And there are many reasons why that. Some of our parenting is often quite authoritarian and controlling because parents also drive competitiveness. They want their children to do well, and they can be quite critical of their children and harsh of their children if their children are not doing very well. We know now, because again, there's lots of studies on this, that over the last 30 years, schools and parents are overly focusing on getting ahead versus getting along. You know, ideally, schools should be a place where we learn to get along, but now our places of schools constantly focus children on the need for succeeding. They're constantly ranked and judged and sifted and so on. Interestingly as well, there has been reductions in play. Children don't play like they used to. You know, when I grew up, I used to play all the time, play in the streets or whatever, although I grew up in Africa, so I was sort of playing in the jungles. But now, even young children can have homework up to 2 hours a night. This capacity for playing and just being a child has been eroded in terms of, in place of this needing to compete and achieve and compete and achieve and compete and achieve. We see entertainments are focusing more and more on the issue of exclusions and rejections. So we have all kinds of competitive behaviors, talent competitions, cooking competitions, you know, where people are made to stand in line and we wait, the drums roll, who are we going to chuck out this week? Highly sensitizing people that it's not just about winning competitions, it's about being thrown out. It's about not being good enough. And sometimes some of the judges can be pretty critical and pretty unpleasant. And then, of course, there are the promises of riches, the politics of envy, as we would say, and the politics of wanting. So there's a whole range of reasons why our competitive systems are being stimulated. So the thing is then we have this stimulation of this competitive social mentality, which creates this fear of not being good enough. And this is also linked to living in a socially competitive world. And I think the point about it is understanding that some forms of our self-criticism that is soaking through Western society is because we are overly stimulating competitive psychology, and that's coming through economic processes. Okay, so we need to understand that, because if we can understand how our algorithms are working, right, we know what's driving them, we know why we're being driven in the way that we are. That is mind awareness, and mind awareness gives you an opportunity to stand back from things, not get personally involved, not seeing it as your fault. It's not your fault. You didn't design this culture. You found yourself in it. So it's not your fault you got caught up in it. But if you can understand how it's working in you, this gives you a chance. This gives you an opportunity to say, hang on a minute, do I need to let these programs, these algorithms run inside of me? Now, the thing about the issue is that the competitive mentality, this competitive psychology tends to go with two different wings, okay? Now, most people sort of sit somewhere in the middle, but some of us get chucked out to the edges. And in one, individuals become very concerned with how they sit in the community, how they sit with their friends. It's called the downrank psychology, and they focus on social comparison. They compare themselves to others, but they usually feel inferior. They have a sense of shame that they're not good enough. If people found out about them, they would reject them. They tend to be submissive. They're not terribly assertive, and they're often striving hard to achieve and do and prove themselves worthy. And if it doesn't go very well, then they become highly self-critical. But there are also uprankers, and the uprankers are also a problem for society because they move into positions of power, they control industry, they get into governments, and these individuals are also socially comparing, but they have a sense of superiority and entitlement. If you challenge them, they show aggressiveness, they become humiliated, they'll attack you back, they won't submit, they don't take responsibility. They're also quite striving, okay? So these individuals tend to be called more narcissistic or sometimes psychopathic. And I won't mention names, but I'm sure you can think of individuals who are like that. So you get these two wings, right? This side that's very competitive, entitled, they kind of go out there and they're like the dominant gorillas, you know. And then the other, the rest of us go, oh my God, because we feel like failure's no good. And these are the kinds of processes that are involved in that, shame and self-criticism. So let's have a look at this one. Then we want to have a look at self-criticism and this whole aspect. Now, we have said before, remember you've seen a brain like this, that when people are critical of you, when they put you down, you know, this is going to stimulate an area of your brain which will make you fearful and depressed. But you can do it for yourself, right? So if you are critical of yourself, if you put yourself down, then you're going to stimulate the same brain pathways. Now, we saw that in an earlier talk, so it's very important that we understand that. So criticizing myself can stimulate the same brain systems as criticizing other people. Now, if you put into Google, right, pictures of self-criticism, you will be amazed, or perhaps you won't, at the huge number of pictures that you can see on self-criticism because it's such a common process, okay? So here are just some of them. And when we're self-critical, we have all these kind of basic ideas. I can't do it, I'm not worthy, I must be perfect. Here's another one, right? And once again, you see this sort of dominating, this powerful, dominating, attacking process within the self. So there's it's not gender, it's gender neutral, you can see here. Okay, the feeling of being unlovable, unwanted, not good enough, here it is, right? These are very, very common messages throughout the Western world when the self-critic gets going. And why is it so common? Because it's a basic algorithm in the brain that you're tapping into. You're tapping into this basic dominant submissive algorithm. So here we are, there it is again, right? So when you look at this, basically you're seeing this, but acted inside your own head, okay? That's what you're seeing. Seeing this, but now activating inside your own head. So this is important. This is, I saw this, I thought it was quite an interesting one. This is classic self-criticism when it's doing you down. So if we look at the critic then, what is the critic doing? Well, the critic is doing a lot of things such as monitoring your behavior. Remember, we said that monitoring was a very important part what the subordinate needs to do. They need to monitor their behavior and then they label their behavior. So here we are, the critic saying all these things, you're a failure, you're a fake, you're inferior. And then the critic will warn you, oh, well, if you don't get your act together, nobody will want you, you will be rejected. Now that is what we call an archetypal fear. That's a real big one for humans. This fear of actually not being able to compete in the world, not being able to gain status, that actually you're going to be inferiorized, if I can use that word. Okay, that marginalized, that's a biggie. And that one in your brain, the threat system really doesn't like that. So what happens is that if you hear these messages, this is the only thing it will do to you. It's not going to inspire you because it's not designed to. when the dominant animal attacks the subordinate, it's not to inspire the subordinate, it's to force the subordinate to actually lose confidence. That's what it's supposed to do, right? So when you're attacked by a dominant, you don't get more confident because then you get injured. You have to learn to do that. And that's exactly what this mechanism does if you play it in your brain. If you do this to yourself, you will run this defeat submissive mechanism, okay? And then, because you're a human, then you'll end up feeling a sense of loneliness and disconnection. Now, this is important because think about this. When you are critical of yourself, when you really let your criticism get going, do you feel connected? Do you feel surrounded by loving, caring people? Do you have a sense of joyfulness? I don't think so. When people really get critical, their overwhelming experience is aloneness, separateness, cut-offness, okay? Very important, very important. And this is what it does, okay? Because it's hitting into these basic systems in your brain. So we can begin to understand why we feel so bad as we do, why self-criticism, what self-criticism is doing in our brains. So there it is again. Okay, that's very, very important. So what we're suggesting to you then is that when you get going with self-criticism, what you're going to be doing is stimulating our own or stimulating your own subordinate defenses and living patterns. You're going to start living as a subordinate, a fearful subordinate. So down you go, okay? The key thing is this: it's not your fault. It's not your fault. You got caught by a program in the brain which is really tricky, because we have a tricky mind, don't we? The mind is very tricky. It's very easy for us to get absorbed in it and think that these things are actually true, but they're not. They're not. Okay? It's very important that we see that. Now, we did some studies, actually. I'll just tell you about this very briefly. We found that when people were being self-critical of themselves, for example, we'd ask people to imagine, not getting the job, failing to get a job, and then people were asked to be critical of yourself or be self-reassuring. And what we showed was that when people were critical of themselves, they were stimulating areas of the brain which were related to threat. Whereas when they were being compassionate to themselves, they were stimulating areas of the brain related to more positive feelings. So this was clear evidence that self-criticism versus self-compassion has quite different impacts in your brain, right? So once you learn this stuff, then you can start to choose how you're going to work your brain, okay? Because remember, none of this is your fault at all. You're just simply learning how the system works, and then you can play it, and then you can steer it, right? So here is the process then. We have the origins of our criticism. It can be in our past, it can be because of family backgrounds, it can be in our cultures, it can be in the firms that we live in, it can be the businesses that we're in, can be very hard driving and critical. So we get triggers, and these triggers can be linked to emotional memories. The way we criticize ourselves, we're going to have a look at in our next talks. We can look at the functions, because people often think that being critical will help them, but as we'll see in our next talk, often not. Often as criticism will just make you go down. So we're going to be looking at the effects of criticism. Now, there are many reasons why we're critical, actually. We can have it as a warning, as I've just shown you. We can have it as a drive for self-improvement. Some people believe that they're critical and they just whack themselves. You remember that picture, the person whacking themselves on the head, right? If I do that enough, somehow that's going to help me to improve. Okay, well, it might give you a little bit to begin with, but sooner or later, you will knock yourself out with it all. Sometimes it can be cueing from memory or habit. Sometimes we do it because we don't want others to do it. I'll criticize myself before other people criticize me. Sometimes it is to avoid aggression, as we saw with the Aztecs, right? Sometimes we blame ourselves, or we take the blame for things, or we criticize ourselves because we're very frightened to acknowledge, actually, this isn't my fault, it's somebody else. Because we don't want to be angry with somebody else. Sometimes if we had a very critical parent, we become very anxious about saying, actually, your criticism is unwarranted. I think you're completely unfair. You shouldn't criticize me. That can be quite scary for a lot of reasons. Sometimes people have this idea that if I didn't criticize myself, I wouldn't know who I was. Where would I get my guidance from? How would I know what to do? So that can be another reason. It can be a way of what we call affect regulation or emotion regulation. There's studies showing that sometimes for depressed people, they actually can make themselves feel better if they criticize themselves than if they criticize other people. And sometimes criticism can be linked to trying to get rid of a feeling of badness within inside of yourself. So this is important then. So here we are with this. Okay, this is the thing. We've seen these studies, we know this. Now, guess what? Of course, when we get into these states of mind, one of the most important things is learning what will get you out, because you're now steering your car. You're now driving this stuff, right? And you now know that if you get caught up in this stuff through no fault of your own, then trying to switch your states, trying to switch your motivational state will help you. So you get your vagus going, you do your breathing practices, you do your compassion practices, do your wisdom practices, and we're going to be looking at that in our next talk. So the key thing then is that all of us have this capacity to have different kinds of relationships within our heads. When we're being self-critical, we literally have a hostile part to ourselves that's attacking ourselves and telling ourselves horrible things. And then there's another part that just feels beaten down, you know, depressed and so on and so on. But we also have the capacity to be caring of ourselves, understanding of ourselves, supportive of ourselves. And that part of the self is the self, the compassionate self that you're wanting to cultivate and develop when you are experiencing disappointments and setbacks. Okay, so we're going to switch you out of the competitive system, which is attacking and going down, into the caring system, which is supporting and guiding. So here's this model that I showed you again, but this time you can see what we're trying to do. So when you're in the competitive mentality, you get stuck in the feeling low rank and inferior and I'm no good and other people are better than me, or you can go the other way, which can be problematic for other people. So what we want to do is to shift our minds on purpose into a caring mentality where we start to pay attention to our distress. We pay attention, we work out ways to be helpful and encouraging and supportive. If we're struggling, we've made mistakes, we've gone down or whatever it is, we've experienced a setback, or we're not the way we want to be, or we're not as attractive or as intelligent as we want to be, then we have to find ways to support and encourage ourselves. Because if you just kick yourself in the head, like you remember that one, okay? If you just do that, you've got two problems now, because you've got the problem of the disappointment about the thing itself, and then you've got the whack on the head, okay? So you're just giving yourself an extra hard time. So let's see, our take-home message for the day then is remembering that our minds have been built for us, not by us. They've been built by nature, and they have a range of systems and algorithms that have been evolving over many millions of years. And one set of algorithms is to enable animals and us to live in hierarchies, which mean that when we get threatened by dominant, powerful others, we tend to go down. We show that we're submissive, we lose confidence. The problem is we can actually do it for ourselves, okay? We can stimulate that system unintentionally. Now, look, there's nothing, there's no rocket science about that. You know, as we've spoken to you before, you know, you can stimulate your sexual system on purpose by just fantasizing. So you can stimulate these algorithms on purpose, or just by thinking in certain ways about yourself. Now, the more we understand our minds and how our minds are built, why, this is called mind awareness, developing insight into the structure and the nature of the mind and why the mind does the things that it does, then we can begin to become mindful, use mindfulness to steer them more helpfully, which would be them, by the way, not them, sorry. Okay, and as we will see in our next talk, we can work with the powerful parts of self-criticism by switching our motives into caring and compassion. When we do this, we stimulate very different systems within us. So, mon amis, that's our talk. So you now understand a little bit about self-criticism, how it works, the functions of self-criticism we'll be looking at in our next talk, but at least we have prepared ourselves for doing compassionate work, looking at self-criticism more detail and compassionate work. So we'll see you in our next talk, talk 12. Take care until then.